I guess let's see what happens. We're back in the shop again, another weekend, another day doing the things we need to do. This week...
Yeah, you saw that. New equipment alert. We just got an Osmo camera that does tracking, and this is the first time we're using it. We'll see how this goes.
What we actually have to work on is taking the tub off of the CJ-2a here. So we need to get it up and off so that we can roll the frame out, get the powertrain out of the tub, and actually get the 2A out of the shop so that we can start doing some work to prep the engine for the M715 project and get that one out to the machine shop to have the engine rebuilt, and then kind of come back to this for a little bit while we wait for that to come back, and then we'll be actually at a place where we start putting the engine powertrain together in the M715. So exciting things ahead, and grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So the first thing we're going to have to address as we plan this is there's two ways to take care of the steering column. The first option is with the, waiting for an airplane to pass over here, two options to deal with the steering column. The first option, since we've got the steering wheel off and everything else, is we just lift the body up and over the steering column. It will fit, will go. It does mean that as the body comes up, the body either needs to come backwards or that the frame, along with the steering column, needs to go forwards. That has the merit that once the body is off, you actually still have the steering column attached and you can still move the frame around and steer it as you go. The other option at this point would be to disconnect the steering linkage, which comes from the bottom of the steering box and the rod that comes up here to the bell crank assembly, and then remove the steering box by just dropping it out of the frame and onto the ground. Both of which are valid and viable options in this case, because I want to use that steering box for the other CJ-2a project that will be the restoration, or the partial restoration anyway. So debating which of these is going to be a better option for us and how much time is going to be involved in each. The merit of just lifting the body off the vehicle is that once it's off, we have a lot more access to remove the steering box and deal with the steering linkage and everything else. Once the steering column decision has been addressed, the next thing will be to address all of the body mounts. So, the bolt that was here under the fuel tank, this forward bolt that's under the driver's seat, the corresponding bolts that are on the passenger side, and then the two bolts at the rear. Once those are removed, the body should just lift up off the frame. So that's our plan. I think I go back and forth. I think I'm going to see how easy or hard it is to get some of the old ball joints to come apart, with the idea of addressing this from the perspective of dropping the steering box out, since I do intend to reuse that for the other project. It's a little bit easier to see how this steering linkage works on this bare frame that's sitting here. So there is a pitman arm that is attached to the steering box, and then it goes into this linkage here, going up to the bell crank, and then the bell crank to move things back and forth. So when the body was taken off of this one, it's clear that the choice was made to just pull the pitman rather than disassembling the linkage. In order to take this linkage apart, This cotter pin has to come out, and then this fitting, you can kind of see the larger recess there on the back side of it. So the idea is that fitting then slides forward and allows the ball to come out of the end of the fitting. At the end of the shaft there is this cotter key, and it's a screw fitting that will unscrew and allow the pitman arm to move backward and out the larger portion of the hole to the rear of the pitman in the picture. The question, of course, with this old stuff is how difficult is it going to be to get that piece to slide? Part of the good news is that as we've been acquiring parts for this project, we've acquired extras of a lot of things. And so this is another steering column from another Jeep that came as a parts with the other bits and pieces of the project. And again, we see how this works, where we've got the pitman arm with this ball on the end that sits into that linkage. I think I'm going to try seeing how hard it is to take that linkage apart and let that decide whether or not I'm going to try to jockey the body off the frame over the steering column or drop the steering column out at this point. Thinking it's going to be easier to drop the steering column out since I'm by myself today, but it's all going to be about how hard it is to take this linkage apart in order to free it up. So in terms of where to take the linkage apart, I have the choice of doing it here at this front bell crank, which is relatively out in the open, and if I rotate the steering, I can actually move it forward to where it lines up about with the front of the cross member, or I can try taking it apart back here at the steering box. Just a lot less access, and the idea of pulling the pitman off like others have done, it's going to be pretty much a non-starter while the engine is still there. So I think we're going to focus on seeing if we can take this forward link apart. Start with a little bit of brake clean just to kind of help remove some of the grease, help us see what we're actually looking at and dealing with here. Definitely some stuff that is kind of just popping loose and built up grease and gunk. I can see that this collar does move, which is a good sign. And the steering linkage on this one is not frozen up. And so it actually does move, and the vehicle does kind of sort of after a fashion anyway steer. This is another one of our nails that has been used as a cotter pin. I think what we're going to need to do is remove the nail, which may then allow for this thing that resembles a giant flat blade screw to be backed out. So let's see if we can get that nail out of there. I gotta admit, that's probably tougher than any cotter pin you would have found. And the nail is gone. Now apparently there is a specialty tool that can be used to address, at least in part. I'm sitting here breaking more of these pieces of grease turned to rocks. And I'm finding that this sleeve is not very attached. It's got either a layer of grease built up underneath it, or there's a rubber gasket of some sort here behind the metal sleeve that was there. So for the moment, since those just slid off, I'm going to push them aside, Assuming that is in fact supposed to back out, I can say that a screwdriver alone is not going to be enough. As I say, there is apparently a specialty tool for this application that is probably the right thing to have for taking these apart. Definitely going to need more torque though than I can apply with just the screwdriver, but I have an idea. Use a crescent wrench to help apply some additional torque to the flat of the screwdriver and see if we can get that to move. Yep, that is moving, or bending my screwdriver, one or the other. After a couple of twists with that, now I'm able to spin it by hand. And that plug comes out. And that just has a dish where it's supposed to rest up against the ball. So now let's see if we can get this to agree to come apart. Just like that. That wasn't nearly as bad a job as I was thinking it might be. So with that, we should be able to drop the steering box out underneath the frame. The steering box here is actually held in by a bolt here and a third one here. And there is, it feels like a nut on the back side of these. That should be as simple as taking those bolts and nuts off, and then with a little luck, the steering box will drop out. The ones on the outside of the frame appear to be a 9 or a 5/8, with the ones on the inside feeling like they're the same size, so 5/8 and 5/8. Hopefully these don't put up too much of a fight. The access to the back side of these is a little bit tricky, in amongst and around brake lines and a word of warning, these old rusty bolts can get hot. So watch your fingers. This seemed like a good idea. Had a little bit of a problem, again, with that clearance between the block on this engine and the steering box, because it needs to move in order to drop past the frame. And in order to move in, it wants to contact the block. Not entirely sure if it would have made a difference if I had taken apart that linkage at the other end or not. So I think I would have still ended up not being able to jockey this past the frame. The good news is that now when I lift the body up, this can move with the body. And hopefully we'll be able to wiggle it past the frame when the time comes. So in order to lift the body, I need to probably get the vehicle where it's not sitting on the lift. I'm trying to show you the lift arm there and here underneath the frame. So I'm going to need to put some tires on the Jeep so the Jeep can sit on the ground, or some jack stands under the Jeep, and then remove body bolts. As I noted earlier, it looks like this tub is really held on by 6 body bolts. One here, and one back in the cargo area on either side. I can't quite reach the cross member on the back side of this, so this could be a real short hit. Not quite enough room on the bottom end of that one for a box end wrench, so let's take a walk around the Jeep. And now we do the driver's side. This one's got 2 big nuts as a spacer. So for anybody that's feeling like they missed something, how we went from building the Jeep to taking it apart, back up a couple of videos in the playlist, and we had the conversation about how there's a lot of good parts on this Jeep, but a lot that are rotted out and not usable. And we've concluded that it's going to be better to use the good parts, not use the rotted out ones, and that really is going to be easier if we take it all apart, separate one from the other. And there are some good parts like the fiberglass tub that we will ultimately sell, because while it's a good part, we're not going to use them in our build. With that, the body should be ready to fly. All right, we're gonna set the Jeep down, reposition the lift to see if we can lift up the body. Moving it forward slightly, trying to get to where you can get the lift on it. Lifting it with some sort of sense of balance. Kind of contemplating if I would be better off trying to lift it from up above, and wondering if there are, in fact, any decent lifting points that aren't underneath. I might try from up above. I think that might be a better, safer option. Try to position the arms so that I can get a ratchet strap around everything and be lifting the body from a place that is going to be hopefully relatively solid. So I'm actually going to try to connect into some of these holes that go through the firewall with the hopes those will be a little bit stronger than just grabbing an arbitrary lip. I guess let's see what happens. So we missed some wiring for rear taillights. We still need to get this connect. We're still basically going to have to lift up and over the steering. But on the whole, that appears to be working. Let's clip some wiring and we'll continue lifting. Those existing wires were for the taillights. Here we go. Okay, we're going to roll the body or the chassis forward a little bit to help take care of some of the noise and conflict with the steering column. Didn't seem to work quite the way I was expecting it to. There does appear to be a something attached to the steering column. We'll need to free that up. So a little bracket being held on by a hose clamp. That, I think, will address what was trying to interconnect the two. I think that's about as far as I want to go with that because we're getting close to running into problems with the knobs on shifters. I want to make sure that all of those are going to clear as this comes up as well. Go up a little bit more. Those popping noises are the steering column getting kind of bound up a little bit. And of course I moved the shifters so it's not a neutral anymore. The body doesn't want to roll forward. Okay, so that dropped the steering column out of the dash. So it's now partially clear of the body. Looks like the rest of the shifters should be clear, or should be in places where they will be clear. Make sure that shifter is going to pop loose. Steering column is loose-ish. Unfortunately, that is as far up as our lift goes. So that's the downside, is that the body is not completely clear as we would like, but we can now roll the chassis out from underneath, possibly put the body on a different cart, get it out of the way, separate this stuff. Almost, but not quite, got the steering linkage out here. I apparently left something running, and it took a little bit of time, but so I managed to shift the tub up onto the lift itself, get it up a little bit higher to store it for a little bit. And this will let us have a little bit more access to the body, the frame, and everything here to try to work on what we need to do. It really does also give us a great opportunity to get in here and start inspecting the work that was done once upon a time to this frame, where it appears that things were plated or something of that nature happened to the tops and bottoms of the frame rails. We've got the evidence of the welds all the way along the top and the bottom. So, as well as the diamond plate that was used as a reinforcement there on the front. So we'll pick this up, and next step will be to try to pull the powertrain out of the frame.